Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Person You Want to Be. I am your host, Eric Teplitz. Today's guest, Doug Chamberlin, has worn many different hats in life. He has been an A-list Hollywood screenwriter, a university professor, a full-time investor, a hiking guide author, an independent publisher, an infopreneur, a nomad, and a self-described hilariously unsuccessful house flipper. He has written numerous screenplays, television episodes, sketches, and television scripts. He co-wrote the screenplay for Toy Story 2, a film which earned both huge box office success and widespread critical acclaim. It has a rare 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, frequently appears on lists of the greatest animated films ever made, and earned the Golden Globe Award for Best Picture, Musical, or Comedy in 1999. And with his wife, Carolyn, Doug co-authored perhaps the best hiking guide I have ever encountered and personally enjoyed and put to use, The Complete Hiker's Guide to the Backbone Trail, the second edition of which was published in 2021. Doug Chamberlin, welcome to The Person You Want to Be.
Thanks. It's nice to be here.
It's great to have you here. I want to start with your childhood. It seems like the person that you want to be, as for many of us, has evolved over time. And I want you to think back on maybe your earliest memories as a kid as to what notions you might have had of what kind of person you wanted to be.
That's funny. As a kid, I remember my parents had an old reel-to-reel tape recorder. I don't know why my dad bought it. He had some purpose for it, I guess. But what happened with it is I got my hands on it at age like 6 and just loved playing with it. And I would make little shows like radio shows or tape shows and playing back for me and a couple of friends and then erase them and do another one. And just really silly stuff, stuff that as maybe a third grader, I thought, this is just great. This is hilarious,
Right.
But people would always ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would usually say I want to be a mechanic, an auto mechanic, because I don't know, I liked kind of tinkering with things and trying to take things apart and put it back together. But then one day it occurred to me, wait a minute, I don't think I actually want to be a mechanic. I'm just saying that. I mean, what I really love doing is just playing with this tape recorder, making these things and playing them back and editing them as good as a little kid can. So I think pretty early on, I was a bit of a ham, and I liked being creative. So I knew I wanted to go into something like that.
Fantastic. You probably wonder what you would have done with today's technology as a kid.
I know. I would just be overwhelmed by it probably. Wouldn't have even shown up in school or something. Just been out in the woods playing with, my phone.
Right. I often think about that, about even some of history's most accomplished creators, what they would have done with modern technology. Would it have actually been a distraction and an obstacle to their creating, or would they have been even more prolific and powerful? Who knows? Where exactly did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Long Island in Nassau County, near Jones Beach. I didn't live on the beach or anything, but in that general area. And when I was 13, my family moved to southeast Pennsylvania, to Bucks County. And so the second half of my youth, I spent, my teenage years, I spent in Pennsylvania, which is a whole different world than Long Island was. It was much more rural. It was kind of semi-rural with farmland and then a housing development and then more farmland.
Yeah, interesting. When we spoke before the interview, we realized we had this in common, that we grew up in fairly close proximity. I grew up in Northeast Philly, so within the city borders, and definitely had more of an urban environment than it sounds like you did.
Yeah, I think probably on Long Island, it was a little closer to the area that you grew up. That was pretty much suburbia there.
Right. So you went to high school in Pennsylvania. I
did. Yeah, I did. I was, when we first moved to Pennsylvania, I was kind of sullen because I was an 8th grader and, they're sullen anyway. And I really didn't want to move. I didn't want to try to make new friends and all that sort of thing that comes with moving. And so for the first couple of years, I was kind of reclusive. You know, I didn't really try to be outgoing. It's not like I didn't like people, but I just didn't really know how to open up and make friends in a new place since I was the new guy. And it took me a couple of years before I really started coming out of my shell there. There was like a certain turning point where I realized, wait a minute, I don't think I used these terms in my head, but I thought I kind of need to be goal oriented here. I need to work towards something to make me happy, because I was just sort of retreating otherwise. And then that was pretty much when life got better for me in high school. And so by my last couple of years in high school were a blast. I was in the high school play, and I was in different clubs, and, I had friends, and it was a whole nother world after that.
And did your concept maybe of what you wanted to be or do change at that time of your life?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, up until then, that was kind of the first time that it occurred to me that I have some control over who I am. Up until then, I sort of felt like, well, I was happy in Long Island. Then my parents moved me to this place where I'm not very happy in. I don't want to be here, et cetera. And like I said, after a couple of years of that, kind of just going home and writing poetry in my bedroom, after a couple of years of that, I'm not sure exactly what the epiphany was. I don't know that there was one wham bam moment, but over like a period of about maybe 12 months or so, I just started realizing I can do something about this. And so what I did is I joined lots of different clubs. I made a list of all the things I liked doing anyway, and I decided I'm going to try to find other people who like these things, and that's how I was able to open up in high school.
Sounds very healthy and resourceful to me, and I love that idea of that clicking in, where your agency clicks in at some point in life. You realize, hey, I have some say in this. This is my life. Right. Because I'm always fascinated.
You're not born just knowing that. Maybe some people are, but not me. I tend to be an introvert overall. So my sort of de facto, comfort zone kind of thing was just to sort of fall back and quickly come home from school and just do stuff by myself at home, watch a lot of TV and, that kind of thing. So I had to come to a realization that I could do something different than just falling back into what my normal patterns would be.
So you mentioned school plays. Were there any other significant clubs or activities that you participated in?
Yeah, I was on the board of the board. That makes it sound so big deal. I was on the board of the literary magazine for the high school, and my parents are church folks. So in church, I was in some groups in the church too, and made some friends that way as well.
Wow! So it sounds like
I also signed up to be one of the people who did the morning announcements over the PA system, which turned out to be a lot more fun than I even thought, because they let you get kind of snide and sarcastic sometimes, a little bit. So people started to know me as, oh, you're the guy who says those weird things on the PA system.
Yeah, interesting choice for an introvert as well.
Yeah, well, I'm okay on stage. I'm fine in front of a group of people. I could talk to a room full of 1,000 people. I'm fine with that. But a one-on-one conversation is actually more of a challenge for me than talking to a whole bunch of people. Maybe that's why I liked that tape recorder as a kid.
Really interesting. I mean, yeah, technically, by definition, introverts, what that refers to, that spectrum of introversion and extroversion, isn't about being outgoing versus quiet. It's about how you recharge. Introverts need solitude to recharge, whereas people who are more extroverted, they get energized and juiced up by the interaction with other people. I also find it fascinating, the difference between communicating one-on-one or even in a small group versus more of a performance setting. And I think that's a common experience for a lot of performers. They can feel maybe at ease on stage, but when it comes to, they feel maybe more vulnerable in a more intimate and less performative social context.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, an audience is people, but an audience is not a person. An audience is something different than a person, I think.
Right. Interesting. So you ended up going to Northwestern. And I'm curious as to what was involved in that choice and what you ended up majoring in while at Northwestern.
I actually transferred to Northwestern. I started off in a smaller school in central Pennsylvania for 2 years called Susquehanna University. That's a neat place too. But then I transferred for my second 2 years to Northwestern. And you asked me how I chose Northwestern. It sort of chose me because I sent out applications to 5 different schools, and that was the one that accepted me. So I'm like, I guess I'm going to Northwestern. Yeah, I mean, that if they hadn't accepted me, the other 4 schools didn't accept me. So if Northwestern hadn't been kind enough to like my application, I probably would have stayed at Susquehanna for the full time.
And did you declare a major right away at Northwestern?
I did. At Susquehanna, I had been a double major because, I mentioned as a kid, I thought maybe I wanted to be a mechanic, but then I also liked to do creative stuff. I still had that going on. Even when I went to Susquehanna, I was a double major in English and computer science, which is sort of a weird mix. And I asked my my advisor there, like, what can you do with a double major in computer science and English? And he said, you can take all the words in one sonnet and divide them by all the words in another sonnet, I guess. But I never really figured out exactly how I could put those 2 together in the workplace. I'm sure there is a very good career for someone like that, but when I transferred to Northwestern, the course load was tougher there, so I had to pick one of. I didn't want to keep doing a double major, so I just went with English at that point. So I have a degree in English.
Gotcha. And I know that you stuck around in Chicago for some time after school, correct?
I did. I was there for a couple of years after that because while I was at Northwestern, I fell in love with the Second City. And the Second City, some people know what that is. Some folks probably don't, or maybe people of a certain generation might remember the show Second City TV, which was a sketch show for many years. But anyway, and that was based on the Second City, which is the name of a very famous improv stage show and company that has been in Chicago for, I think, probably at least 50 years, maybe 60 years. I think it started in the late 50s. And they're sort of maybe along with the Groundlings, are like the country's leader in improv. So a friend of mine at Northwestern absolutely wanted to take classes and try to get into the Second City, or at least take improv classes and have fun doing that. So, and he convinced me to go with him. So we started in a place called the Players Workshop of the Second City, which is where it's like the entry level place where you learn improv. And I fell in love with improv. I was much more interested in it than I was in my studies at Northwestern. And so after I graduated from Northwestern, so in most cities, if you're young and you want to be cool, what do? You start a band, right? At least back in the 80s, still you'd start a band. But in Chicago, if you're young and you want to be cool, you start a comedy group instead of a band. So comedy groups are like rock bands in Chicago. So all these young people want to be, want the world to notice them, and they start these sketch improv comedy groups. So the fellow who was to become my writing partner of 20 years, he and I started a comedy group together in Chicago. We did a show at a place called the Roxy. So that's really what I was focusing on in my couple of years after graduation. So graduation was weird for me because, when you graduate from college, your first thing on your mind is, well, now I have to go into the working force and get a real full-time job, and what am I going to do? And I was never really a work for a boss kind of guy. I mean, I have had jobs and I have worked for bosses, but it's not really, not really who I am or what I like being. And I did some interviews just before I graduated. They set up some interviews, and they were supposedly using my English degree, but these were just, I don't know, writing code that went along the bottom of websites. This was when websites were a brand new thing, writing ads basically that scrolled along the bottom of a website. This was for Prodigy, which is long gone.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And I just remember thinking, I got an English degree. I'd like to be, Shakespeare, but I guess I have to do that instead. And it just, I've never really been into wearing a suit, and it just kind of didn't work out for me. I didn't really have the oomph, and I think it probably showed. And my heart was really in improv. I really wanted to somehow be like, get onto Saturday Night Live or something, that I thought, boy, what kind of life would that be if I could be a clown and get paid for it? That just sounds a lot better than the world I was seeing from these interviews. And plus, this was during a recession too. This was in the 88, 89 period when there was a recession. So jobs were scarce anyway. I wound up just working at temp agencies because my real love was trying to get this comedy group going. And so Chris, that's the fellow who was my writing partner. He and I worked on this show for like a year and had a group of actors together that we had auditioned to. We all worked with well, and we did this little show at the Roxy. And, I kept thinking maybe a man with a big cigar is going to show up in a limousine. He's going to say, "Kid, you're brilliant," and he's going to hire you for Saturday Night Live or, something like In Living Color or some sort of show like that. And I later found out it doesn't work that way. But at the time, that's what I was hoping would happen. So that's sort of what happened to me right when I got out of college. And what was the question?
Well, there's a lot of interesting...
I'm like 2 topics further on than whatever the question was. I don't know.
There's a lot of interesting threads there. So first of all, Chris, your comedy partner, was he someone you met in college?
No, I met him at the Players Workshop classes. He was a fellow improver. And he and I hit it off really great. We just realized we had the same sense of humor. We thought the same things were, funny, and some same kinds of things needed to be made fun of in life. And we just had the same sensibility. So we had pretty good respect for each other too, as far as a writing partnership. So we worked well together.
Interesting. What is Chris's last name?
Webb, Chris Webb, W-E-B-B. His name is also on Toy Story 2.
Oh, wow. We will get to that. That's really cool and interesting. So you guys connected as a function of working together in improv in Chicago, in the Second City. And by the way, for listeners who might not be familiar with Second City and SCTV, many huge names in comedy came out of Second City. And in fact, like, what comes to mind recently is if the show Schitt's Creek, which stars Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara, they both came out of Second City. They were among the many.
There's a huge list of successful comic actors and comedians who came out of Second City. I mean, like half the cast of the original Saturday Night Live, the one from the 70s that was so celebrated. Belushi, Bill Murray, they all came. A lot of those people all came out of the Second City.
It's amazing how that work happens in clusters in certain areas and locations and specific times. They seem to like just breed, a tremendous amount of talent all at once. So I totally understand and relate to the kind of romance of that choice and that lifestyle and the sort of naivete of thinking, wow, maybe I'll get discovered and this will be, my ticket to ride. But you and Chris, did you write? You mentioned the show that you put together and you found other actors to include in your group. Did you actually write the show with Chris?
Yeah, he and I wound up writing it together. It turned out to not really be an improv show, even though I loved doing improv. I must say I wasn't particularly brilliant at it. I saw some other people doing it who I thought, wow, you're a professional. And Chris and I were actually better at sitting down and writing things the way a comedy writing team would do, as opposed to getting on stage and just creating it in the moment, which is what improv is about. So the show we wound up doing was a sketch comedy show, but it wasn't an improv show.
Yeah, that is a key distinction. And, you mentioned the Groundlings, which, of course, I've been very familiar with, having lived in LA for the last 20 plus years. And the Groundlings, of course, is another group that was founded in the early 70s. A lot of people from Saturday Night Live came out of the Groundlings. And to this day, they do a remarkable, wonderful, really great, high-quality work. And they incorporate both improv and sketches in their shows, and they train people on both. But yeah, it is a very different animal, taking the time to write things out and think about the jokes versus respond spontaneously to situations.
Watching improv, being in the audience watching improv is amazing. First time I ever saw it, I just was in awe. I'm like, how do these people possibly do this? How can anyone do this? And then there are rules that you learn to make it so that the scene can work reasonably well on stage as it's playing out. But when you first see it for the first time, I was shocked. Just like that show, Whose Line Is It Anyway? That was a pretty famous improv TV show.
Exactly. So it's interesting. You found your collaborator pretty early on. And did you guys end up making the decision to move out to Hollywood together, or what? How did that come about?
We did. So how that happened was we had done this show, and I was hoping that guy with the big cigar would show up. The guys with the big cigars, they don't really just go around to every little show here and there and see who's hot and who's not. They sort of wait for the cream to rise to the top in the industry. They want you to wind up in some place that already has a lot of clout, and then maybe they'll go and check you out there if everyone's already talking about you. They don't just usually find total unknowns like that. So what happened was the show finished its run, and there was an ad in Premiere Magazine that the American Film Institute had put in there, and the ad was for people to submit sketches to a contest. The American Film Institute was going to do a 3-week sketch writers workshop out in Hollywood, where they would have various comedy writers come in every day and talk about the craft and all that. And, it was pretty prestigious. And so I took some of the sketches that were my favorite that I had written for that show, and I submitted them, and I was one of the winners. I later found out there were 1,200 or so entries, and there were about 15 people who were selected out of that. So they flew me out to Hollywood, and I did this 3-week course, if you will, where all these mostly old-time comedy writers would come in. I think they had more old-time guys because those people they're retired, so they have plenty of time to go and speak at things, But these guys would be there. Some of them were like, a pie in the face was funny then, and it's funny now. These real old-school kind of shticky sort of comedians. But they absolutely knew what they were talking about. Their sense of humor may have been somewhat dated, but as far as like the rules and the craft and tips on how to be successful, these guys knew it all. They had been through the meat grinder for years. They knew exactly how the business worked. They knew what kind of things wound up being funny and what kind of things usually fall flat. So that was really, it was just an absolutely amazing 3 weeks. And it also was a gigantic ego boost for me because, after the show in Chicago, it ended and, no man and a big cigar came by. I was kind of left wondering what to do next. And so after I did this 3-week workshop, that was kind of an indicator to me that maybe I have enough chops to make it in that business. Maybe I'm not just kind of, fooling myself because there was a champion. How old are you at that point? I think I was like 22, maybe. I was a couple of years out of college, 23. And here was a champion saying, we think you're pretty good. So that was a real great ego boost. And that made me decide, okay, I don't really want to stay in Chicago and put on a suit and tie anyway. I'd rather move to Hollywood and see if I can make it work. And with this little bit of tiny bit of success behind me from having gotten into that workshop, I thought it was worth a go. So I went back and I told Chris about this. And I said, I'm thinking of moving to Hollywood. What do you think? If I move, do you want to move with me? Do you want to still be a team and be a Hollywood team? And, it didn't take him long to decide, yeah, I want to do that. Because I think he was feeling the same way about Chicago, kind of. We were sort of going in circles there. And so the AFI then did, a year later, they took the best what they thought were the best of those sketches that were written in that workshop, and they did a half-hour TV show on NBC. Wow. It was like, here's the students' work, that kind of thing and Jack Lemmon hosted it, who was so nice. And, he was basically very supportive of new faces and people trying to break into the industry. And so he was the host who introduced the sketches and so that aired on NBC. And if the other thing wasn't an ego boost, that absolutely was. Wow. So, when that happened, that's when Chris and I decided to move out.
Yeah, so just to be clear, you were a writer of the sketches, but you didn't perform at this point. You weren't.
Oh yeah, that's right. No, I didn't perform. I had pretty much given up on the thoughts that maybe I was a good enough actor to be a performing actor because I had seen plenty of people in Chicago who were so much better at me than acting. I realized what I was a writer who liked performing his own material, which is not the same as an actor exactly. So no, I didn't. They had professional actors in it. Harry Shearer did one of the sketches I wrote, and he's a bit of a hero of mine, so that was exciting.
That's awesome. Did you ever consider stand-up comedy, or did you even experiment with that at all? Because that's a classic writer performing his own material, her own material kind of thing.
It is, but stand-up comic, I have amazing, so much appreciation for stand-up comics because they have to deal with, they have to deal with hecklers. They have to deal with playing in some place that's a real kind of a dump, and maybe a real small audience turns out, or maybe they put you on at midnight or something. There's a lot of I think it's an even harder world to be successful in that. And so that really wasn't my kind of thing. Plus, the kind of writing I do really isn't like stand-up jokes. In the first place, it didn't really lend itself to that. I did go try it out one time at an open mic night in Chicago, and it only went so I wasn't too excited about it. I deliberately didn't tell any of my friends. I just wanted to go to a complete audience of strangers and see what I thought of it. And I didn't like the experience enough to want to do it again. It gave me great appreciation for people who can do that.
The people who are great at it make it look so easy. And, you know, if you have any experience whatsoever, either watching people who are not great at it or performing yourself, you realize how difficult it is. Yeah, it's just like a lot of things in life. The really good people make it look easy, you know, and then you try it and you realize it's not easy. They're just really good. Right. And also well seasoned, no doubt, because it takes a lot of, you have to put in your time, and no matter how much natural talent you may have, you need to be seasoned by real world experience.
And so it was about this time that I began to really solidly think of myself as a writer, you know, because I know that you like to talk about the person you want to be. And when I was out of college and in that period where I was more interested in doing improv than I was in getting a job, I still sort of felt like I should get a job. That's what people do. And I'm kind of being delinquent in not doing that. But you know, darn it, I like comedy better. So I still felt that way about it. But by the time that the AFI thing came around, I began to think, okay, no, Doug Chamberlin is a writer. You know, so I began to think of myself more confidently in that sort of way and start to put myself forth in the world as a guy who's a writer, even if I was just an aspiring one.
I love it. The 3-week experience that you had, which almost sounded in a way like a comedy boot camp. Were there any names that I might recognize of the people that were, you know, your instructors there? Yeah,
Carol Burnett was one of them.
Wow. Oh, by the way.
Yeah, Carol Burnett, Steve Allen. Now, younger people don't know who Steve Allen is or was,
Tonight Show?
But he was the original host of the Tonight Show. He created the Tonight Show. As well as a lot of other stuff, and wrote lots of books and was just a real Renaissance man. So he spoke one day, and there was a group lunch afterwards. I wound up sitting next to him and talking to him at lunch. That was kind of thrilling. The writers from The Simpsons were there, Jake Hogan and Wally Wolodarski. Even though The Simpsons is obviously not a sketch show, it did start as sketches on the Tracy Ullman show, and so they were there talking about transitioning from short form to longer form comedy writing. And a couple of the writers from I Love Lucy were there, and so that was fun to see the old folks from I Love Lucy. I don't think they're probably with us anymore. This was a good 30 years ago. Bill Dana was there. He played Jose Jimenez. That was a character he did for a long time. Who else? Well, anyway, there were lots of folks, but those are probably some of the more well-known people who were there.
Yeah, and this, by the way, very much brings home a clearer understanding of why this was such a pivotal experience and why it was so affirming and validating and confidence building, because, you know, these aren't just some hacks or unknowns these are big stars, big names.
Sure. Yeah. And, we talk about an ego boost, right? And every one of them had good advice that I tried to learn from.
Any specific?
But yeah, I think maybe the single best thing I got out of that wasn't necessarily advice that someone told me. The single best thing I got out of it was just this belief in myself. I figured if I could get into this workshop, I still never had been paid a penny to write anything, you know. But at that point, I thought that gave me enough juice to feel like this is a fight I think I am ready to do.
Yeah, and that fuel counts for a lot, especially when you're young and inexperienced. I'm curious as to what maybe your family thought of these decisions as a young person that you were making. Were they supportive? Did they leave it up to you? Did you feel any pressure one way or another from them?
They were supportive, at least on the surface. They said, you know, well, we believe in our son, and whatever you want to do, you do. But they were very careful to keep saying, you know, but you need a fallback. You should have training in some sort of, you know, they were worried that I'd be a guy who wanted to be a writer, and then it never really went anywhere, and then I would be, you know, really like destitute or something. So they didn't say, they didn't say, writer, that's not a real job. They didn't do that, but they also were sort of concerned that it wasn't a real job. I think that was the best way. But they were basically supportive.
So tell me a little bit about those early years in Hollywood.
So
once you moved out there with Chris.
Right. So even though I had gotten into this workshop, and even though there was that special on NBC, I don't want people listening to your podcast to think, well, this guy, whatever, he won a contest and then everything was cool, everything was easy. It wasn't like that. So I moved to Hollywood right after the AFI thing, and I thought, what's the big deal? Getting your stuff on TV is not so hard, right? I mean, you win a contest and then you meet Carol Burnett or whatever. So right. So I thought, okay, great. I'm here. I'm ready. And so I didn't work again for 4 years in the business. I obviously wrote lots of scripts. Chris and I were constantly writing scripts in the evening. And in the daytime, we definitely worked, but we worked at regular day jobs. So I went back to temp agency work again. I wound up living in the most cost-effective apartment I could find. So I shared a two-bedroom with two other roommates. One of whom was a young Japanese lady, and it was a really bad part of town. It was on a street that routinely had gunshots on it. There was a fellow killed at one point down at the end of the block, you basically didn't go out at night. The place was a real dump. Still struggling, starving artist kind of situation. And then the jobs that I worked during the day were these lovely temp jobs. Like, for example, I remember one of them, my job was I was scrubbing the rust off of poles in a warehouse. So there was this big warehouse that was like a 2-story high warehouse and these giant metal poles going up in the middle. And they had me up on a ladder like 10 feet off the ground with what looked like a large Brillo pad. It was like a square foot or so, and it's this big steel wool thing. And I was up there scrubbing the rust on these poles all day with a mask on, with rust flying around in the air. And the guy kept saying, you do a good job, and we'll promote you, kid. So after a couple of weeks, the guy says,
Did he have a cigar? Was he the guy with the cigar?
No, he was not the man. He was definitely not the man of the big cigar I was looking for. But yeah, he did talk that way, if I remember correctly. So after 2 weeks, he promoted me to cleaning the men's bathrooms, which actually was better than scrubbing the rust off the place. So I thought, hey, I'm things are looking up. I'm moving up in the world. So I did a lot of ridiculous temp jobs like that, just trying to survive, just to pay for the macaroni and cheese while I was working on scripts on the side and trying to break into a business that I thought I had already broken into, but I hadn't actually. So that was like the next 3 or 4 years until things began to finally turn around for me and Chris.
So how did you keep your morale up during that time?
Mainly hanging out with other writers in the same situation, other people who I knew were good but hadn't made it yet, and took a lot of classes, a lot of writing classes. You build up your circle of contacts that way. Sometimes those classes are better for meeting contacts than they are for actually learning from the instructor. So I did a lot of that. Went to a lot of sitcom tapings just as an audience member, because when you live in LA, that's something you can always do for free. And it kind of reminds you that, yes, there is an industry doing this and it's right out there. You just haven't been able to get in the door yet. So I did various things like that, but mostly I just focused on the work, just trying to write scripts. And the nice thing about doing comedy writing is if you're working with a partner, writing scripts is sort of fun because you're just basically trying to make your partner laugh. And if the partner laughs, it goes in the script. If the partner didn't laugh, you go, well, that didn't work, and then you move on. So it can be a fun process sometimes coming up with these things. So that kept me going as well.
Yeah. How did you choose the scripts that you would write? Were you writing with specific pre-existing television shows in mind? Did you do all of your writing in collaboration with Chris? And, how did you decide what to write? Were you writing with TV in mind, with movies?
I did do almost all my writing in collaboration with Chris. He and I pretty much came to LA as a team, and we presented ourselves as Chamberlin and Webb. And the kind of scripts we were writing, it was sort of a combination. We had two different goals. Either one would have been fine to be successful in. One was we would write sketches, because there were a few sketch shows on. I mean, there was obviously SNL, but then there was In Living Color for many years, and Mad TV, and there was some more short-lived sketch shows that we would write things for and submit them to, or try to get them submitted, try to get them even noticed. And then the second route we were also looking down was sitcoms. So we thought, well, that would be fine too, even though those aren't sketches. That would be a wonderful way to make a living, wouldn't it? You know, to write for these shows, even if it's not such a great show, at least you're getting paid to make people laugh. So the way that writers break into sitcoms is by writing spec scripts, which means you write an episode of the actual sitcom with really no delusion that you're ever going to sell it or that it's going to actually be filmed. That script is instead it's a calling card script that you try to send out to people in the business to show them that you can write for television. The number of spec scripts that actually got filmed into episodes of TV series, I think, is you can probably count them on one hand. So that's not really what they're for. So you're writing this thing that you know will never be filmed. So that part of it's a little disappointing right off the bat. But the hope is that someone will read this and say, "This is pretty funny. This fellow wrote, like, say, you know, in this case, like, say, a Seinfeld or something." You know, the people at Seinfeld aren't going to buy your script, but the people at some other show might read it and go, "Sounds like a Seinfeld episode to me. These guys are okay. Maybe they'll work for our show." So that's the other kind of script that we were writing at the time.
So who were the intended readers for these scripts, or the hoped-for readers then?
Well, what you're trying to do at that point in your career is, first and foremost, you're trying to get an agent. You really need an agent to get read in Hollywood, because almost all of the television series and also movie companies too, movie studios, they don't want to read unsolicited scripts because they're worried about, first of all, they don't have the time to read a script from everybody in town who wants to get noticed. And second of all, even if they did, they're worried about getting sued because, let's say you write a spec script for some show and it winds up just by accident being quite similar to a real episode that they're working on. Well, when that episode comes out, you know, maybe that writer is going to start screaming and yelling, "You stole my script, you stole my idea, I'm going to sue you." You know, so they want to make sure that doesn't happen. So they just, they say, "I'm sorry, we just don't read any unsolicited scripts." So as a way of protection, so the way around that is you need to get an agent. Once you have an agent, the agent officially submits your script, and then they'll read it because they know it came through an agency, it's documented, there's no way that you're going to sue them, and et cetera. And also the agents serve as sort of a weeding out process because agents don't represent every writer in town. So these execs kind of figure that if a script comes from an agent, then that writer's probably pretty good already.
So was securing an agent,
you really focus on getting an agent.
Yeah, was securing an agent a breakthrough, and at what point did that happen?
It was a huge breakthrough. It was pretty much the biggest breakthrough we've ever had. Most young writers will tell you the day I get an agent is, you know, the most important thing in my life, right? So how that happened is Chris and I wound up in another contest. Contests were good for us because the contests are an even playing field. You know, to win a contest, it doesn't matter. You don't have to have some uncle in the business or anything like that. You just basically have to have a good script. So we entered a sitcom contest, which is the Warner Brothers Script Writing Fellowship, and Warner Brothers does this thing every year where they look at scripts. It's similar to what AFI did with sketches, and it took us a couple of attempts to get in. In 1993, we got into it. I know it's mentioning 1993 sounds horribly dated at this point. But this is
not to me.
This was all going on. I mean, there's people listening to this who are like, I wasn't even alive in 1993. But
right.
But at any rate, the year doesn't really matter. I mean, the process is still somewhat similar because a lot of how Hollywood operates is actually just about human nature. So we wound up getting into this workshop, and then that workshop had enough prestige that a couple of agents actually called us at that point, because I think what they did is they called up Warner Brothers and said, you know, who's in the workshop this year? We're looking for, you know, fresh faces or whatever. And so we did get a couple of calls from agents, and we wind up signing with one of them. This was a smaller agency, and they were pretty good folks there. And then about a year into that, our agent, who was the new guy there, he had actually been getting people water in meetings and stuff when we first started off, and he was good, so he quickly got promoted. And then one day he called us and he said, well, there's bad news and good news. The bad news is that I'm moving to another agency. I'm moving to CAA, which is like a giant agency, like one of the top two or three
creative
largest
artist
agencies in Hollywood. Creative artist agency. And he said, and CAA told me, we don't really want you bringing any clients with you. We want you to start off fresh. And he said, but I fought for you guys, and they said, okay, you can take Chamberlin Webb with you. So we wound up then at CAA because of this relationship with this fellow who had been the new guy at the other agency. And then that opened further doors too.
Yeah. So what were some of the first successes of scripts sold that got your feet in the door?
The first script that Chris and I sold together was an episode of Weird Science. That people have heard of the movie Weird Science, but I don't know if as many people know that there was a television series based on that movie that ran for a year or two called Weird Science. And so we wrote one script for that as a freelance, and that was exciting because we got to go to the Universal Studio lot and we worked there, and we got to eat in the Universal Commissary, which was very exciting, and walked around the back lot during our breaks, and worked on this one episode, which eventually aired, and that was our very first gig, so that was pretty exciting. And then we wound up doing 2 episodes for an animated show called Duckman, which had Jason Alexander as the voice of Duckman.
Oh, wow.
It was kind of a neat show. It was very acerbic. It was not for kids at all. It was raunchy. It was rude. It was, that was a little closer to the kind of writing we wanted to do. So Chris and I were really excited when that happened, because it sort of felt like, hey, this is kind of like, The Simpsons Junior. We're almost like that. So that was very exciting. And I felt very honored and kind of humbled that these people who did the show that I liked believed enough in me and Chris that they said, okay, here are these characters that we've created. You guys can play with them for a while. We give you permission to do that. And that was another huge confidence booster.
How many years into your Hollywood phase was this, from the time you guys moved out to Hollywood? How long was it before you saw this episode of Weird Science on TV that you had written?
That was 4 years after we moved to Hollywood, and then the Duckman episodes were 5 years. So, and a lot of folks gave me the advice early on. They said that the break-in period is about roughly 4 years on average.
Wow.
And, so at the time, I thought, well, I wonder if that's going to be true for us, and it turned out to be, maybe just by accident, but turned out to be almost exactly spot on. That it just tends to be about 4 years of just continuously banging your head on the door until they finally go, all right, we'll let you in. You have to just, some people show up and a day later they have a gig, and some people, it takes them longer than 4 years, but a lot of people quit along the way. And that was the single best piece of advice that anybody at that AFI sketchwriter workshop, the one with the old timer guys, the single best piece of advice they gave me. And several of these people said the same thing. They said 2 words: don't quit. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I know not to quit. And it didn't really strike me at first, but then they kept saying, I mean it, don't quit. If you don't quit, if you have any talent at all, you'll eventually break into this business. And if you do quit, you obviously won't break in. And what they wound up meaning, again, it didn't really strike me as that sage advice, like, yeah, I know not to quit, but I had a lot of friends along the way who were reasonably talented, but one by one, a lot of them quit. They said, I can't keep doing this. I want a life. I need more money. I don't want to live in a lousy apartment. I'm tired of the rejection. Maybe I'll move back to, the town that I grew up in or whatever. And so a lot of them quit along the way. And just by that sheer, I refuse to quit rule, I think is a lot of why Chris and I were able to get as far as we did.
There's no question that persistence is essential in, I think, pursuing any career in the arts. And there's no question that that quitting is obviously means you're not going to get there. But at the same time, certainly there are people who keep up with the persistence. They don't quit. They have talent, and not everyone gets a break eventually. Would you agree?
Yes, that's absolutely true. I mean, breaks, to use that phrase, are there is luck involved in those. I mean, I believe that a lot of luck is kind of making sure that you're in the right place at the right time, and that is something you can control. But there still is luck. I mean, the fact that agent moved to CAA, that was luck. Okay, I mean, there was a little more to it than that. He could have he could have said, well, I moved to CIA and you guys weren't good enough, so I didn't fight for you. But instead he did, because I think maybe all the work we had put into our writing before that maybe led to him feeling like he wanted to do that. So there was, some influence there, but there was also luck. But I mean, if you stay in a place like Hollywood long enough, eventually some sort of good luck is going to bounce your way, I think.
Whether it's enough or not.
I think it also, I think, needs to be said that I'm a white guy, so I'm not going to claim that. So it's the same for everybody. I did benefit a bit from white privilege. I think, especially in 30 years ago. But nonetheless, it still took a lot of struggle. It still took a lot of work to get anywhere, because there's a lot of folks, including a lot of white guys, who would move to Hollywood and then just kind of gave up after a while because it wasn't going anywhere.
I think it's a fascinating topic of, this notion of you've got these ingredients of talent, perseverance, and luck, and really, if you're going to have any sort of sustained success, it seems to me that all are required. You might get by for a little while with 2 out of 3, but it's really a risk-reward calculation that I think any individual in the arts has to make for themselves and determine, is this still worth it? And because you're never guaranteed success. Certainly, you're guaranteed that if you stop, you won't succeed if you haven't yet. But it's an interesting confluence of things that have to line up. And of course, you have to show up in order for that to even be possible. But so I know that there's a litany of names that you had mentioned to me of people that you had worked with in some capacity over the years. And it is an astounding list of people. And so if I throw out a name, would you be able to give me an anecdote or some kind of story for the context in which you...
Depends on the name. I guess it depends on the name.
Okay.
There's some folks I've worked with that I don't necessarily have a scintillating story about, but most of them I probably do. So
yeah, I think you would with this one, and it's the name that certainly jumps out at me, and that's Steven Spielberg.
Oh yeah, we wound up working for Spielberg. I was going to say with Spielberg, but you work for Spielberg, obviously. We did 2 movies for DreamWorks with Steven involved. Neither of which wound up getting made, but they were still pretty exciting to work on, and they were both sequels. So we had written the movie Toy Story 2, and that got us into a whole other kind of a level of expectation from execs and from producers, because in other words, they think, oh, I see, you're the people who write sequels for movies for kids, so they're like, okay, I guess that's what we're doing now. So DreamWorks hired us to write Casper 2, which was the sequel to the Casper movie, and then they also wanted to do Small Soldiers 2. And Small Soldiers is a movie about toys that come to life. It's not animated; it's CG, computer generated imagery instead. So we were working on both of those actually kind of at the same time. There was a bit of overlap there too. And it was exciting. At one point, we got to go to Steven's house and meet with him there. That was kind of thrilling. And got to meet Stan Winston, the creator of the dinosaurs for Jurassic Park and lots of other things. So if you're looking for an anecdote with Steven, the way he came across to us, at least, was he came across as kind of shy and unassuming. I mean, I know he can't be that shy if he directs movies all the time like that. You have to be able to tell people do this and don't do that. But at least with us, he kind of just sort of sat back, and he had that baseball cap on that was kind of low, and he'd sort of peek out from under the bill of it a little bit. And he really let Chris and I do the talking mostly, which I thought was really, really cool for him to do that. He didn't just come in and dominate. I want this, I want that. He wasn't like that at all. He was much more, let's hear what they have to say kind of thing about it. So that was real exciting. And the first time I met him was actually in the commissary. A lot of stuff happens in these studio commissaries. I guess I was in the commissary, standing in line to get tamales. I'm sorry, at DreamWorks. DreamWorks. Standing in line at the tamale table, and I was talking to Chris, and for some reason or another, I backed up a little bit, Maybe someone wanted to walk in front of me. I don't remember why. I backed up a little bit, bumped into the fellow behind me, and turned around, and it was Steven that I bumped into. That was the first time I met him, as I bumped into him on the line at the commissary.
Are you ever starstruck in these kind of situations?
I was at first. In my first few years, I was like, wow, there's... I remember the very first star I ever saw was I was sitting in a Jack in the Box, and Chris turns over and he says, "Don't look now, but Ruth Buzzy is eating over there." So Ruth Buzzy was on Laugh-In, on the show Laugh-In in the late 60s. She played the woman who always had on a hairnet and would hit people with her purse. That was kind of her running gag. So I'm like, oh my God, it's Ruth Buzzy. I'm in Hollywood. Anyway, that was in a Jack in the Box. So I was real starstruck at first. And then it became a little more just kind of an interesting part of the job, but not, oh my gosh, it's a big star, because you realize after working with folks like that they're just basically, they got the same problems that you do. They're trying to get some tasks done, and they're hoping people will help them and not slow them up. So it really just kind of began to feel more matter of fact. And there were a couple of times where I met people who were heroes of mine, and then was really bummed out from the meeting too. Between those kinds of situations, after a while, you kind of start to get used to it.
Right. There were a lot of things we could touch on just from what you shared there. Among them was, for those not in the know and not, familiar at all with Hollywood and the inner workings of it, you write a lot of scripts, and they don't necessarily turn into movies, or they turn into movies, but they never actually get seen. So could you speak a little bit to what that is like from the perspective of a professional writer? You're a professional screenwriter, TV writer, movie writer, and you obviously put a lot of work, hard work and effort, and in a lot of cases, I would imagine, love into these scripts. And what percentage would you say actually see the light of day?
I think about maybe 10% of the scripts that actually get paid for ever wind up being produced. Only 10%. There's something roughly around there, maybe a little more, but and I think in the movies that number is lower than it is in TV. Yeah, movie-wise, I'd say about 10%. There's a whole industry based on people getting paid for not making movies, which is too bad. But at least you're getting paid for it. So you have to kind of, when you write something, and maybe it took you a whole year to write it, and then they give you a paycheck and say thanks, and then you realize it's dead. It's never going to get shot for whatever reason. You kind of have to. You have to do two things. First of all, you have to just sort of remind yourself that at least you got paid for writing, and you have to kind of think, well, I got a nice big check here, so wasn't completely in vain. The other thing you have to do is you have to remind yourself that this is a long game. This is a marathon. That's it's the handful that make all the other ones worth it. You can't be too myopic and focus on how one script didn't work so well that it fizzled out, or maybe it didn't sell at all, and much less it sold and didn't get made. Maybe people just didn't buy it at all. You can't let that get you down too much. I mean, it does a little bit. It's impossible to not have feelings of being disappointed when something like that didn't go where you wanted, but you have to really keep a big picture attitude about this is an overall career, if you want to look at it that way. And some are going to be hits and some are going to be misses, and the hits make the misses worth it.
Right. My understanding is that you basically were at this full throttle for about 15 years. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, the team broke up, Chris and I broke up in 2000 I think it was 2007, somewhere around there. We had kind of had our run. We had a really, I thought, a really terrific run. And Hollywood is all about heat. It's all about whether you are considered hot or not. And almost everybody in town has an arc where they get hot for a while and then it goes down. Sometimes it goes up and down, sort of like a roller coaster. Sometimes you just have a single arc, and after several years, you're just not as hot as you are. And nowhere is this more obvious than with movie stars. So you'll have, the list of people who were hot movie stars 20 years ago and now cannot get a movie made. That's a huge list of people. And I think most of the people who are stars right now, in 10 or 15 years from now, probably won't be stars anymore. And it's not like they did something wrong. It's not like they used to be great, but then they lost their mojo or something. It isn't really
It's the
like
nature
that.
of the beast.
It is. It's the nature of the beast. And that applies to writing. It applies to, writers in Hollywood. It applies to other people. It even applies to crew people to some degree, too. Hollywood is just unfortunately, it's just very focused on how hard are you? How much are you being talked about in town? What other people are championing you? Is somebody more important championing you? You get some of their heat if that happens. And our heat had been cooling for a while. And also we were getting a bit older. We started getting some gray hairs and things, and that's the kiss of death in Hollywood. It's not
For
fair.
writers?
It shouldn't be that way, but there is ageism in Hollywood. There shouldn't be, but there is. And
Even for writers.
Yeah, oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. Not just for actors, for writers just as much. I think the attitude amongst execs, by the way, all the execs are like in their 20s or 30s. Almost all of them are. That's kind of annoying. I think the attitude is two things. One of them is, well, our audience is more younger people. Generally, so we want someone with the sensibility. We want fresh new talent, fresh new ideas, new takes on things. That's what they say. But I think a lot of what is really going on is the older a person gets, the less willing they are to put up with bullshit. The less willing they are to be
Right.
kind of exploited. If you're in your 20s and you're right off the bus and you're excited and you want to make it in this town, if some producer says, "Okay, well, I want you to work till 4 a.m. every night," you'll go, "Okay." And by the time you're 40 or 50, you don't go, "Okay." You go, "Dude, I have a life," And so unfortunately, there's that going on too. It isn't fair. I hope the industry changes, but it's been that way for a long time.
Maybe you could write a
that
script.
was part of it too.
Maybe you could write a script for a new series called "Dude, I Have a Life."
Yeah, "Dude, I have a life." Exactly.
So was it an amicable parting of ways with Greg then? Were you both on the same page, more or less, or?
Yeah, with Chris, we were. It's not like we had a big falling out or anything. We just decided that things weren't as hot as they used to be, and we did want to try other things in life. So, he and I are still friends. We just aren't working as a team anymore.
Okay, I have to at least. There's so much we can talk about, and I hope to cover some other aspects of your life beyond screenwriting. But before we move on from that, because it is fascinating, I think, to a lot of people listening. Toy Story 2. How did this opportunity come to you guys? Obviously, it was a massive success. And one thing that I'm personally interested in is there are a lot of cooks involved in these films, even on the writing end. So, for instance, there's 4 people that are attributed to having written the story for the movie, and then there's 4 people that are attributed to having written the screenplay. And only one of those names, I think, was overlapping. So tell me a little bit about how this works, what does the collaboration process look like, and how does this get made from the writing perspective, Toy Story 2?
Okay, so first of all, the reason that there are different names on this under story credit than there are under writing credit is there's a couple of reasons for that. The first thing is the way that animated movies are made. So animated movies are made differently than live action movies. There's a long tradition in animation of having what they call the story department. This even is true of like Bugs Bunny shorts or anything. So the story department in animation, they usually come up with what's going to happen, the story, in other words, but they don't do it by necessarily sitting down and brainstorming, what if this happens and what if that happens, the way that writers would do it. The way they do it visually, because animators think visually. So when they come up with a story, they will draw out the story oftentimes to kind of show how it could work from an animation standpoint. So you'll have different drawings of characters in different situations, and they put those all up on a big board oftentimes, and that's how they show what the story is going to be. And they change the story by changing the pictures. So it's a little different than just sitting around brainstorming like the way writers would normally work. So Pixar has their own story department. They like to come up with their stories in-house. So they had already worked out a decent chunk of the story before Chris and I came on board. When we met with them, and we were the first team of writers to work on the script, So they basically ran the story by us. They showed us the different the storyboard that they had worked out with all the different pictures in it, and that's sort of where we took off from there. So they had the basic framework of generally what they wanted to have happen already worked out, and that was worked on by the directors and the story artists there. So they already knew. For example, when we got on board, they already knew that they wanted Woody to be kidnapped. They already knew that the kidnapper was going to be Al from Al's Toy Barn because he had made a brief appearance in the first Toy Story movie. And so he was a pre-existing character that they all kind of thought was fun in the first movie and wanted to do something else with him. They didn't have much of an idea what Buzz was going to do yet. They knew that it would be neat if Woody was kidnapped, and they figured Buzz would have some hand in trying to rescue him. That was going to generally be a rescue plot, a rescue kind of story. There was no Jesse. Instead, Jesse, what became Jesse at that point, was a character called Señorita Cactus. It was like a toy that was a cactus. It sounds odd to describe it that way, but it was. And Bullseye, the horse, he spoke in their original versions of it. And later he got changed into sort of more of a traditional Disney sidekick animal who doesn't speak, who, is
speaks certainly
with
his facial expressions though, and body language.
Oh yeah, of course. He communicates a lot, but he doesn't actually talk. So at the beginning, so there were, quite a few things that were, that changed along the way. The way that Chris and I got on board, we had not worked in the movies before Toy Story 2. We thought of ourselves as television writers. We had done these Duckmans, we had done the Weird Science, we had done some other comedy half-hour shows, and we had written lots and lots and lots of sitcom specs. And the latest spec we had written was a spec for the Larry Sanders Show, which was really great comedy with Gary Shandling. So the folks up at Pixar were looking for some writers to help them work up Toy Story 2. And Pixar is not in Hollywood physically. They're up in San Francisco area. And they kind of have a bit of I don't want to put it too harshly, but they have a bit of a disdain for Hollywood. They don't like the kind of the love you kid, mean it, let's do lunch kind of Hollywood schmoozy stuff. They're not really into that up there. So they were looking for some writers who weren't heavily Hollywood tainted, that they didn't want the let's do lunch types. So they were looking for some newer writers, and they were looking for writers who knew how to write for pre-existing characters, and that means television writers. So they had put the word out to different agencies, and this Larry Sanders spec that Chris and I had written, our agent for some reason submitted it to Pixar for them to consider us for Toy Story 2. The reason I say it that way is because this script was full of the filthiest language. It was the most foul-mouthed thing. It was I think it was on HBO, I believe.
HBO, yeah.
It was just this. Yeah, so, and they actually want you to curse on HBO. So we peppered this thing with the foulest language. The guest that we had included was Chris Farley, who was known for having some pretty bad language on his own. So we just really went crazy with it. And so we get a call like, the guys at Pixar want to talk to you about Toy Story 2 because they liked your Larry Sanders script. And I'm like, what? Are you thinking of someone else named Doug who wrote a Larry Sanders spec? Because why would they read that and think, what, these people should write for Buzz and Woody? But we later found out why, which is that they were looking for sort of non-schmoozy non-Hollywood types and all that sort of thing. So we went up there and we had a series of interviews with the director Ash Brannon and various other folks involved. And these interviews, quote unquote, they were not like a job interview where you put on a tie and you go and you come with your resume. The interview, if I remember correctly, was 6 hours long, and it consisted of sitting around eating candy and Twizzlers and playing with toys while talking to them, watching bad TV and making fun of it. I believe we rode scooters around the halls of Pixar, drank a bunch of sodas. And then, after about 5 hours of this goofing around, they finally said, "All right, you want to talk about the movie?" So, they just wanted to make sure that they could get along with this. The last thing they wanted was people who would put up a fight and wouldn't agree with their taste and had all these preconceived Hollywood notions.
Imagine if your junior high self could have been privy to that interview and realizing that sounds like a dream gig for, any kid, like that's the interview. You get to sit around eating candy, drinking soda, watching TV, joking around, riding scooters.
It was fabulous. And Chris and I, he turned to me, I think at one point, and he kind of whispered, "You better enjoy this." Just like, this is really just step back and realize how much fun this is, how great this is. This is kind of the moment that you envisioned in your head for all those years of scrubbing the rust off of poles, or like even earlier on when I was a kid goofing around with a tape recorder. This is sort of what I wanted it to all be about. So a lot of my experiences in Hollywood were not so great. A lot of them were pretty stressful, but that was one of them that really you remember because you go, this is pretty neat.
Anything else that you want to add to or touch on in regard to Toy Story 2? Anecdotes or, overall?
Well, in spite of that fun atmosphere that we just talked about, it was a very grueling gig. It was we did have to work until 3 a.m. So that did happen, but it was we were doing it in the actual Pixar building, and I remember at one point it was like on a Saturday night, and it was literally like 2 a.m. because we were trying to get the script done in time for Christmas because Michael Eisner said he wanted to read the script by Christmas. I'm not sure why. He just sort of, I guess, randomly picked the holidays, and so everybody was trying to jump to getting it done in time. So that's why we were working so late hours on it. And it was like 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and Chris and I were alone in the writer's office, and we were thinking, I bet we're the only people in this building right now. I mean, I bet this whole huge facility, and it was a big building. I bet this whole thing is just dead. I feel completely isolated alone here. I'm going to go out. I'm going to go down the hall and get a soda. I'm going to see if there's anybody else here. I go down to the soda machine. I go into the large main room where most of the animators worked, and there were like, it looked to me like probably 50 animators all sitting there at their cubicles like this, with working on the different animated moments. And there was one guy who was like half asleep at his keyboard, and the computer was rendering a shot of Buzz. Rendering means that the computer builds his character, on digitally, and he was building like between frame number 1 and frame number 2. So Buzz was kind of going like that on the guy's screen, and the guy's sitting there like, So I went back to Chris and I said, "We're not alone. This place is full of people working." That's
a great image, though, for communicating the tedium involved in work that on the outside looks like it must just be a barrel of laughs and fun, and the reality of just the sheer tedium and long hours that are actually make up the experience. So was the story complete by the time the screenwriters are putting together the screenplay?
No. The other thing about Pixar is that they change it constantly. They change their movie constantly as they go along. Some people have pointed out that Pixar has practically nothing but hits. Like, they seem to be the most successful studio in the world as far as a track record of one good movie after another. They've had practically no, or maybe literally no, flops. And people wonder why. What's the magic at a place like this? How can they pull that off without? How can almost every movie of theirs be really solid? And the reason is that, they like to say up there in Hollywood with live action, rather, what you do is first you write a movie, then you shoot it, then you edit it. But at a place like Pixar, first you shoot the movie, then you edit it, then you write it. In other words, you can do these 3 different processes seamlessly because it's all digital and on computers. You don't have to have that big day where all the actors show up and all the crew are there with the lights, and you better get the take right, because if you don't, that's what you got to use. If something isn't working, they just go back and they start over and they change it. They can change the lighting on a scene after they've already completed it. They can add or remove characters. I mean, they can just redo whole parts of the film until the film is finally really good.
At what point do the actors come in, and how much, you hear stories? Well, the most extreme example I can think of is Robin Williams on Aladdin, and maybe that was a completely different animal. But how much breathing room is there for the actors, for instance, to ad lib, and then the animators have to, recalibrate? Or what does that step look like?
I think there's a little room for ad libbing, but not that much. Usually the actors were pretty respectful about it. recording, the voice recordings usually happens pretty early in the process because you animate to a soundtrack. You start off with the soundtrack first, and so that the mouths can be synced up to it. Then you animate to the soundtrack. So the actors will come in later and do some retakes, obviously, but for the most part, that was very early in the process, getting the voices down.
Right. Thanks for all of that insider information and sharing all of that. I do want to touch on other aspects of your life post-screenwriting. And would you say that when you and Greg parted ways, was that the end of your screenwriting career? Did you do any writing on your own? Do you still periodically do that? Or was that a chapter that was closed at that point and you moved on to other things?
Before I get into that, can I just say one last thing about something from the past that I think would be good, considering what the topic of this podcast series is about the person you want to be. So this is I think pretty good advice. When I was new in Hollywood, after I had done that one special, but then couldn't get arrested, and I was scrubbing the rust off of poles. During that whole period, several people told me you should present yourself as a writer. In other words, you want to become the person that you would like to be. Well, I wanted to be a writer, obviously. And for a while there, I was telling people, I want to be a writer, or I'm an aspiring writer, or I'm trying to be a writer. And people who are already further along in the business said, you are a writer. Just because you haven't sold something, you don't need that validation. Are you writing stuff? I said, yes. You're a writer. Don't tell people you want to be a writer. You are a writer. And just thinking that way, that shift in my head helped quite a bit.
I love that.
I wanted to make sure I said that because I thought that was real important for me.
I'm glad you did. I think that mindset is, whatever it is that you envision for yourself, something that the person you want to be. I like that. The idea of sort of assuming the identity, giving yourself the benefit of any doubt, and then growing into it. And also that distinction, of course, if you're doing the thing, then you are that thing, just right. Because maybe you're not being recognized yet or having any kind of external validation or success. So identifying with the vision that you have for yourself, I think, is huge. And so calling yourself a writer, you don't have to wait until you're a paid writer. You might never be a paid writer, but you're still a writer. So I like that. I think that's very sound. And also you're much more likely to be a paid writer if you already are identifying yourself as a writer.
Sure. I mean, Van Gogh was a painter, even though he only sold one painting his whole life. That doesn't mean he wasn't a painter. He was obviously was a painter. So
yeah. So is that, did you when you stopped writing screenwriting, or when your partnership ended, was that the end of your screenwriting career or not?
Yeah, it was pretty much. I mean, I decided to pretty much put that to bed. I didn't really want to try to sort of half-baked still do that. I did have some stories that were lingering in my head and worked them up into kind of develop them a little more. But I decided to not try to write them up into movie scripts and see if I could sell them or anything. I started thinking of them more in terms of possibly books or just something for my own amusement that I didn't really try to sell to anyone. So yeah, that was around 2006, 2007. That's when we decided that I think we were finally done with Hollywood.
And what then? I mean, that's, how did you even go about reimagining yourself, figuring out what to do next? Had you been doing that maybe towards the end in the back of your mind, or were you starting from scratch? And how did you then go about deciding?
I did. That was the beginning of a pretty weird period in my life where I was sort of trying out different hats, and a few of which worked out, and one of which did not work at all, which I guess I should mention here, which was my wife and I went through a period where we trained to be real estate investors, in other words, house flippers. And, we took all these seminars on how to flip houses, right? It was from a big organization with a pretty famous guru kind of running the whole thing. I don't think I want to mention his name because I don't feel like getting sued or whatever.
I think I could guess.
Well, yeah, but there are several of those people. And we did everything that we thought was right. And with hindsight, it just was a complete disaster. Just, one of the humor books that I've been working on is called How I Lost $100,000 in Real Estate in My Spare Time. And it's a parody of that old book from the 1950s, How I Turned $1,000 to $1 million in real estate in my spare time. So I managed to lose, I think, about that much in my spare time. My wife and I tried investing in Kansas City, Missouri. We don't live in Kansas City. We live in Southern California, but we invested there because the house prices were a lot cheaper there. And we were told you should invest in a place like that. We were instructed that investing out of where you live is perfectly fine. You don't have to buy in the same area that you live. And in our case, all of that turned out to be terrible advice because we wound up with a couple of investment houses that we were like 2,000 miles away from where these houses were. So, and this thing is just sitting out on the street. So if somebody wants to come along and mess with your business, they can do it, and you can't do anything about it because you're a whole plane flight away. And also we managed to get into this just before the big housing crash of 2008. So we got in at just the world's worst time. We thought the housing market had already gone down enough that we were getting in at the bottom, but actually we were getting in just at the very beginning of going over the waterfall. And we were stuck in this real estate for about 10 years before we finally were able to exit. And even then, lost money on it. And everything you can think of went wrong, and lots of things you couldn't think of went wrong. For the low point was when, after everything else had gone wrong, we had a fire that one of the tenants started. Everything had gone wrong. And then our property manager calls us up and says, well, I don't know how to tell you this, but a runaway car went zooming down a hill with no one in it, and it hit your house. I'm like, really? Is the universe trying to sell me something here? Maybe I'm not meant to do this. I have cars with no one in them are smashing into our houses.
I mean, I'm seeing an animated version of that, a Pixar version of that in my head.
Yeah, but if you saw that in a movie, you'd go, that's corny. You wouldn't believe it. You'd be like, oh, that's pretty silly. That doesn't happen.
Well, there's a wonderful moment. There's a wonderful moment in Toy Story 2 where the toys are hiding under cones and attempting to cross the street. And as they're crossing the street, they're in a different, as the light changes red, they have to stop, and they're in a different configuration of cones. And the cars assume that those cones are instructions for them, and it just wreaks total havoc on the track. It's very, very funny.
Yeah.
Wow. So
one of those cars hit our house.
Yeah, right. Fortunately, not with anyone in it.
Yeah, no one in it.
Okay. You mentioned your wife, Carolyn. So how and when did you guys meet?
Let's see. She and I met in, I believe it was 1999. We met in a filmmaking class taught by Dove Siemens, who is a guy who teaches this cool class on how to make a movie on a low budget. And I went to the class more than anything just to kind of meet people, because I had gotten a bit isolated. I was working too long and too hard on things, and I needed to meet some of the folks. So I went there partially to learn what he had to teach, but also I just wanted to get out of the house and meet folks. And I wound up sitting next to Caroline, and she and I struck up a conversation. She lived in Dallas. After the class was over, she went home to Dallas and produced her own film, and I did not.
Wow.
She did. So, yeah. And then we kind of wound up in a long-distance relationship for a couple of years, have these sort of whirlwind get-togethers in different cities, and then eventually she said, okay, enough of this. I'm moving to where you live. So she moved out here.
Huh. So 1999 was a big year for you, between Toy Story 2
it was a very big year.
Meeting Caroline.
Yeah, I like 1999. It was a good year.
And Caroline, the little that I know about her, I know two things about her. Number one, she's a CPA. So interesting that she came out to Hollywood to learn about filmmaking, and she made a film, you said, on her own?
She did. She did that when she lived in Dallas before she moved. She made the film in Dallas,
sure.
not in California.
But she came out to LA first to learn about filmmaking. She
did, yeah. She came out first to take classes, and that's where she met me. And then she went back and made her movie, and then a couple of years later moved for good to California.
And the other thing, of course, that I know about her and the way in which we got connected is that the two of you collaborated on this really, truly incredible, I can't use enough superlatives for it, hiking guide that would be most meaningful to people who live here in Southern California, or people who perhaps want to do something exciting on a trip out here that doesn't entail the usual touristy stuff. And that book, of course, I'm referring to is The Complete Hiker's Guide to the Backbone Trail. My wife and I had embarked on this is a 67 plus mile continuous trail in the Santa Monica Mountains that takes you from Point Mugu State Park to Will Rogers State Park. And it traverses really just incredible, breathtaking scenery, so much high interest. It's a hiker's paradise. And my wife and I, who both have been living here for quite some time and had been on parts of the trail at different times, are just absolutely astounded by this trail. How have we not known about it all this time? And during the course of hiking it, which we've been doing in point-to-point installments, so there's a lot of logistics involved, parking a car at your endpoint, one car at the endpoint, one at the beginning. We encountered various problems along the way, and at one point couldn't find the trail, ended up going to the visitor center of the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area, where we found this unbelievable guide, the book I just mentioned, which answered all of my questions about what we had just experienced and why we couldn't find the trail. And it's, I've said this to you privately, that this book should be a template for all hiking guides, as far as I'm concerned, because it fills so many voids. I'm an avid hiker. I've used many guides over the years in many different areas and places, and every guide comes up lacking and wanting in some way. There's information that just is, why wasn't this included? Some are practically useless. Others are, they give you, most of them give you some information, but not nearly enough of what you really want and need. And this guide is so incredibly thorough and detailed, and wonderfully presented, very easy to use. And also, not surprisingly, given your background, extremely well written and even entertaining. It's an entertaining read in and of itself. Very informative too. So I commend both you and Caroline on a job spectacularly well done. I know that we're not alone, my wife and I. Yeah, I know that you've gotten great feedback on this, even though it's a pretty niche audience, perhaps. How did you if you could tell the story of how you and Caroline, how the book came about? And I'm also especially curious to hear about what the division of labor was, how you collaborated on this book with your wife, who you're a professional writer, she's not. Tell me a little bit about how that all came to be.
Well, so it came about, my wife is the reason the book even exists at all. What happened was, one year I decided, as a New Year's resolution, I was going to get in shape this year, right? And so everybody says that, and I thought, well, I'm not just going to claim that I'm going to go to the gym in the coming year, because that's one of the most common well-intentioned fibs that people ever tell themselves. They go to the gym 3 times and then they quit before the end of January. So I thought, okay, well, let's find some goal that will really make us get in shape, almost as a byproduct of going after it. And I've always loved hiking. Caroline likes hiking, so I said, let's hike this Backbone Trail, because I had heard about it, and a lot of people in the area have been on little bits of it and don't really know where the rest of it goes. So we decided we were going to hike the whole thing. There was no complete hiking guide to it at the time. It's on maps, certainly, but a map doesn't necessarily help you.
As I learned.
When it comes to minutia. Yeah. So, and as we learned too, because we started hiking it and we kept getting lost. I mean, there was lots of unmarked junctions, there's no blazes along it. There are signs at some of the more major junctions, but sometimes they fall down, and other junctions don't have any sign, and you can get lost a lot. And so I began beefing to Caroline after a few days of this, like, why doesn't somebody ought to write a guide to this thing, a complete guide, so that people don't get lost. And my wife did what she always does, which is she looked at me and said, yeah, someone oughta. Which she throws that at me, the old somewhat oughta. She pulls that out a lot with me, and she's always right. I have no defense to it. I'm like, yeah, you're right, someone oughta. I guess maybe someone is me. So I thought, okay, well, let's do this. And she was very gung-ho about writing it too. She thought it would be a great way to augment our adventure. And so we gathered all the information we could, various maps, online things, and there were some books that described portions of the Backbone Trail already existing. And then we set out hiking it with writing the book in mind. And we've hiked it several times since then, in both directions. Sometimes we'll re-hike sections to verify that nothing has changed along the way. And then as far as so that's how it came to be in the first place. And it was always a labor of love. I mean, we didn't think, oh, we're going to get rich writing a hiking book. Obviously, our goal was just maybe to hopefully somehow maybe not lose money by doing this, which we have made a tiny little profit off it. So we wound up not losing money off it at least. But, we do it really for the fun of it and the adventure of it. And then as far as the process of working on it, so we would take a tape recorder with us and we would record notes in the field as we went along. We both had our own tape recorders. And she used a phone for recording and I had a little handheld thing that I used on mine. And then we would take our notes and sort of make a conglomeration of them after we got home, because sometimes we had different takes a little bit on what it was like along the hike. We used our watches at first to try to time the trail to see how long it took to hike it. But the problem is not everybody hikes at the same speed we do. Even I don't hike at the same speed as Caroline does.
Right.
And then we started using apps to help us measure how many miles we had hiked each day. And then also the National Park Service published an official mileage count of the trail segments. And so we used that combined with what we recorded on our phones to come up with to make sure that we matched the mileages to what the National Park said, because we didn't want our book to disagree with what the National Park Service said. That seemed like it'd be kind of weird. So anyway, and then the actual writing of the book, I did most of the writing, not surprisingly, the actual typing and reworking it. And then Caroline would read it and edit it and give me revisions.
I love it.
So that's how we did it. We took about 2,800 photographs, if I remember correctly.
Wow.
And so about 50 or 60 of those wound up in the book.
Yeah, it comes across very much as a labor of love, and it's any hiker will so appreciate it for its usefulness, its helpfulness, and just how well put together it is, and how it literally gives you every piece of information you could possibly want to know. It's also really educational, and it strikes me that it must have taken. How long did it take you, would you say, to work on this book, the first edition?
Wow, I don't even know that I could even guess at that, because we sort of did it in pieces. It took a couple of years, but it's not like we were working around the clock for a couple of years on it, but sort of on and off. And that also, it depends if you include all the hiking time or not.
Sure.
Do you consider that working on a book, or do you consider that having fun? And then, but it took quite a long time to get it put together the way we wanted. The way we put it together is I've bought and read lots of hiking books in my life because I've always liked hiking. And I kind of had a sort of a list in the back of my head of, if I ever write a hiking book, here's what I'm going to do and here's what I'm going to not do. So that's how it came out the way it did.
The hiking guide author I want to be. We could do a whole podcast. It's interesting. It never occurred to me, but it makes total sense of each of you recording, doing, as you're moving, as you're hiking, because trying to take written notes while you're hiking seems, first of all, not fun, not to mention incredibly difficult. But so that makes a lot of sense to be able to sort of narrate your way through the hike. And then, and I'm sure as you did this, you got more practiced at it. And I love how you combined, two different perspectives so that you could get that much more information in. But it is a remarkable, and you didn't obviously, it's not like you got an advance to write this thing. So there was no timetable for doing it. It was, you got to do it at your own pace. And it's remarkable. I really honestly think it should be used as something of a template for hiking guides everywhere. And in fact, if I were in such a position as to hire people to write hiking guides for beautiful places on earth, you guys would be my top pick. So it's
okay. Thanks.
It's outstanding. Now I want to respect your time. There's so much more that we could talk about and cover, and things that we've glossed over. So I just would ask you for a more, in sort of an open-ended sense, if you could talk about other things that, in other ways in which you've expressed the person you want to be, either personally or professionally, that you think are worth pointing out. And then also just taking a moment to reflect on At this stage of your life, who is the person that you want to be? Where are you in your current stage of life, and where is that taking you?
Well, I guess to answer the second one first. So where I am in life right now is if you're wondering, like, how do I make a living? I make a living from investing. At this point, I'm a full-time investor, and I've been doing that for about maybe almost 15 years now. And that kind of came about originally as a attempt to do sort of a side hustle while I was still writing, because, mom and dad said, you better have some other fallback thing, remember? So I thought, well, maybe I could fall back on, buying stocks or something. I wasn't really sure where to go with that. I figured that was something I could do in my spare time. And then that wound up becoming what I was surprised by is how interesting I found it to be. That it wasn't just something I did because maybe I could make some money on it. I really found that much more compelling than I ever thought I would. And it turns out there can be a lot more creativity to something like that than you would think. I mean, usually they tell you, there's no room for creativity in investing. You should just be just solidly number oriented, and you should be very cold hearted when considering an investment and all that. And I wouldn't disagree that that's probably true. But I did wind up finding different ways to try to diversify and different types of things to invest in that would create what I thought was the smartest portfolio. And that wound up actually using some creativity because, I'm not like a big time hedge fund manager who has millions and millions of dollars to throw around into whatever I want. I mean, I have to be smart about it. I have to be able to find ways to invest in assets that don't require a huge amount of money in the first place. So that's why I got into futures and options more than anything else, because they allow you to leverage without having to, go to a bank and borrow a ton of money to do it. So that's what I've been focusing on for the good last 10 years of my life for the most part. And I like it because it suits who I am as a person. At the end of the day, I still am introverted, and I still prefer to kind of work on my own. During my Hollywood years, it was completely essential that I got out there and schmoozed and met people and shook hands and smiled and got to know as many people as I could. And I sort of got that out of my system. I really like being able to just sort of try to make money by pursuing things my own way on my own. I can stay home where it's quiet. I don't have to deal with people who might get on my nerves or who I don't agree with. I don't have to necessarily worry about being told what to do by a so-called superior, somebody who I don't agree with, but they have the power to tell me what I can and can't do. So that's why I found myself liking it more than I ever thought I would in the first place. And it turned from a side hustle into the thing I focus my primary time on.
Very interesting. I think that a lot of times in life, it's explorations lead us to places we never imagined necessarily would have even interested us or that would have appealed to us long term. And that's a really interesting example that you just gave. One thing I wanted to make sure I said in regard to the hiking guidebook is that, my wife and I think it's really cool if you have a partner or spouse. It can really be a bonding experience to have some kind of project that you work on together, that you're both invested in and both interested in, and you collaborate on, and perhaps you each bring to the table different strengths, and you are able to accomplish something together. And just the experience of hiking the trail with my wife has done that for us. It created incredible memories already. We haven't quite finished yet, and it's just been a fantastic thing to do together. So I can only imagine that not just hiking it together, but working on that book together. I would imagine would have been an incredible sort of partnership achievement. Would you agree?
Yes, I definitely would agree. I mean, there was absolutely a team thing. My wife and I have always sort of gotten into things together. Whether it was, the Hollywood stuff, not that she and I worked together in that sense, but we were both interested in it. and also that ill-fated real estate investing that I talked about, that house flipping stuff. That wasn't me. That was she and I together.
Right.
And that was at our first year of marriage.
Wow.
And things went so unbelievably, ridiculously wrong. I can laugh about it now, but they went so wrong that for a while I thought, why are you doing this to me, universe? Why are you just torturing us like a cat dangling a mouse, and looking back on it, I know why. This is what I believe. I think that we had just gotten married, and the world or God or whatever you want to look at it said, okay, you two hotshots, you just got married. You think it's going to be great through thick and thin. Let's just test that out right at the start. Let's see if this marriage is any good. Let's just test it right away. So all this stuff, all this avalanche of nonsense got thrown at us for the first 3 years of our marriage. And, we passed the test. We made it through. So that's how I like to view that.
You didn't give up.
That was the reason that happened. Sorry, what?
You both didn't give up, to quote the Hollywood writers, the comedy writers.
Yeah, we didn't quit. Well, we didn't quit. Yeah. We did eventually give up on house flipping, thank God. But what we didn't give up on was our relationship. We're like, okay, I don't know why this is happening, but we're going to make it through this. Yeah. So there was that, and then the period after that, which we didn't get a chance to talk about. But in terms of with my marriage, after that, we moved to England for 3 years, and Caroline and I moved to England, where I was a professor at a small university there. And that was a wild experience. That was a great experience for the most part. But England tested us too, because England, everybody warned me. They said, that when you move to a country like that, the very things that you thought were so fun and cute and quirky that made your vacation fun, those are the very same things that are going to drive you absolutely mad after you move there. And that's exactly what happened. These weird little things, that reminded you every day that you don't live in the U.S. anymore, and you're the outsider here. She and I had to deal with that together too. Then when we moved back from England, that's when we. I'm sorry. Any
specific examples? Things that were charming as a tourist, but annoying as a resident.
Well, there was. I'm trying to think of something. There's one or two examples I literally can't mention. But it was. People would often correct me on my language. I went into a shop one day and I said, "Do you have vitamin C?" And the woman says, with a kind of a sneering tone too, says, "You mean vitamin C?" Things like that. And after a while, at first, if you were a tourist there, you'd be like, "Oh, isn't that cute, vitamin C?" But after a while, you're like, "Oh, geez, what am I doing?" So it was, that was just a small example. That's sort of cute, but there were some other things that weren't so good, like. If you complain over there in America, if something's not working as far as a business is failing you somehow, you complain, right? You go to the complaint department. Sometimes people raise their voice. They can come off as a Karen if they do that. But at any rate, you do stand up for I'm the customer, and you need to fix this. This is obviously wrong. But if you do that in England, they call that they describe that as abuse. They think of that as verbal abuse. And I don't mean screaming and yelling at someone. I think we'd all would agree that's verbal abuse. I mean, even just complaining at all, they kind of feel like it's England. You should keep a stiff upper lip. You should put up with it, And so they don't like people complaining over there. So one time I had a wax plug in my ear, and I went to the hospital because the British health system is, it's all paid for. It's all nationalized. But it isn't particularly efficient because of that. So I had to wind up going to a hospital and begging them to take the wax out of my ear. And the lady there started giving us some excuse about how the person who does that is not in today, and they are on holiday, in fact. And Caroline started getting mad, and she's like, "Now you listen to me. We're about to go away, and he can't hear out of his ear." She starts trying to do that, and the nurse says, "If you don't lower your voice, you will be thrown out."
Wow.
So there was. Things like that happened. That there was a lot more of a feeling over in England that who do you think you are, the Queen? You just keep a stiff upper lip and put up with things the way they are. We don't like complaining. And as an American, I thought of that. I didn't think of it as complaining as much as I thought of it as trying to fix things. My very first day in England, or my first week in England rather, I was having a terrible day. Just everything had gone wrong. Our move had not gone well. It was raining outside. We were kind of depressed about the way things had been going so far. And I thought, I need a little reassurance. I'm going to go to some place that I know was like American. So there was a McDonald's in town. And I thought, I don't really care for McDonald's in general, but I thought, oh, at least McDonald's, I know what I'm going to get. I'm going to get some fries and a shake, and I can calm down and pretend that I'm at home. So I go into this place, and I ordered like some sort of chicken sandwich or whatever. And so this teenage girl behind the counter hands it to me, and I take it to my table. I take a bite of it, and it's as dry as a bone. Absolutely, just like crunchy, dry, And so, and they don't just give you free condiments in England. You have to pay for these little packets of condiments. So I go back to the woman. I didn't know that at the time, though. When I talked to the lady behind the counter, and I said, "I'm sorry, this is a bit dry. Do you have a?" And I tried to be as polite as I could. This is just a bit dry. Is it possible to have just a small amount more of mayonnaise? And she takes it back from me, and she lifts the bun off the top, looks at it, and she says, "There's enough on there," and hands it back to me. This is the kind of thing that, this is the kind of quirky thing that's not so fun when you live there, and you have to actually deal with this. So I kept my cool. But what I felt like saying was, I felt like just going, "Now you listen to me. I'm not going to move to England and tell the English people how to live their lives, but I'm in a McDonald's, and this is like American soil. This might as well be the U.S. Embassy, and you give the customer more mayo if they want it." Right. So it was a lot of stuff like that was kind of tested our resolve.
But you were there for 3 years
together as a team. I'm sorry?
You were there for 3 years in England?
Just under 3 years, yeah. And actually, it was a pretty good experience overall, but we did have some incidences like that.
Yeah. Was that an opportunity that came to you in terms of the teaching thing, or did you decide in some other way that you wanted to spend time in England?
Well, it's sort of both. What happened was we wanted to move to England because she and I had been kind of fantasizing about being expats for a while and living overseas, just because that sounded like an interesting thing to do. And we had been talking for a couple of years, kind of not very seriously, about if there's some way we could do this, And then I saw an advertisement. I don't remember where I saw it, that this university had been advertising in America. They were actually looking for maybe an American lecturer to go there. And so that was the way for us to go to England. That got us our visas. It got us the work permit that you need to live there and everything. And so I worked I was a professor at this university for 3 years. And after my second year, they made me the head of the master's program in screenwriting there.
Did you enjoy teaching?
That's how we were able to move there. I loved it. The one part I didn't like was marking, of course, grading. You had to read a lot of scripts and write notes on them, and that can be a drag because you have to read them all at once because it's the end of the term. But other than that, the actual teaching, yes, I loved it. Loved it. I taught both undergrads and master's students, and some of them were really talented, and everybody was really nice, and I had a great time. And the campus was this.
What were the size of the classes?
They were pretty small. The master's classes were only like 8 or 9 students on purpose, and we workshop scripts there where everybody brought their script in, and we all read it and gave notes at a table just like you would in an actual like studio environment. And then the undergrad classes were more like a typical class size, maybe 20, 22 students, something like that.
Right. Did that feel like performing? And did that feel more like you're comfortable because it's one-on-many as opposed to one-on-one?
It did. It had that same feeling that I mentioned earlier about, an audience. I mean, I didn't really think of the students as an audience, but it did have that same group vibe to it. And you had to do plenty of one-on-one, of course, especially if you're giving someone feedback on their script. And that's a whole art in and of itself as to how to give people constructive criticism without upsetting them. But
especially in England.
But yes, yes, you don't want to be verbally abusive. That's right. But yeah, as far as like just talking to the class, I really did enjoy doing that. That was a lot of fun, and it was fun to see people grow. It was fun to see students learn and take the suggestions that you or other classmates gave them, and to watch their script get better. That was a really satisfying feeling too.
Well, Doug Chamberlin, thank you so much for this fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed getting to hear about your journey and how it can, you continue exploring the person that you want to be, as we all are doing. And thank you so much just for everything that you shared and for your time today. It was a real pleasure. And by the way, just, one-on-one, you did just fine with me. So
Okay, well, that's good. And thank you for having me on your show. I really had a good time. This was a lot of fun.
awesome. Take care, Doug.